Hello and welcome back to Quite Contrary Flower Farm. Today we are finishing off our 3-part series on buying dahlias. So we've covered already the different forms that dahlias come in when you buy them. So that's seeds, which we didn't cover in the video, but seeds, your standard single tubers, pot tubers, seed sort of cuttings or rooted cuttings, and then bigger full-size plants. And then last time we talked about some common problems that you might have when you receive your dahlias, what's normal, what's not normal, when to contact the supplier and what about, and some pretty quick and easy solutions to some of those problems. And today what we're going to talk about is once you've got those dahlias in your hands and you've opened your package and you've checked everything out, what then? And especially what then when you can't just go outside and put them straight in the ground. But the first thing that I wanted to have a little talk about was, I think I was pretty hard on dahlias last time, or might have maybe given the impression that they're a little bit more tricky than they are, or a little bit more fragile than they are. And I just wanted to point out that most of the time when you get those tubers, they're going to be the best quality tubers that the grower has, and they're usually going to be fine. Like a lot of the time once you get them, they look perfect. So don't be stressed, don't hope I haven't put you off. They'll be fine more often than not. And just to illustrate my point about how tough dahlias can be, I actually have a clump to show you. This clump was not dug out last year. It was dug out last year. So this has been out of the ground for over 12 months now. It was dug up in May of 2020. It was put into this greenhouse where it was stored. I then divided all of my dahlias. I had enough for what I wanted, and so I stopped. I ran out of time. I had other farm chores to do, and so there were a few clumps that were forgotten about. Now you can see on this one that it's still sprouted. These were last year's sprouts. And then I didn't discover these until probably May of this year, or even later. It was June this year when we dug out our dahlias, and I needed the crates that these were sitting in the greenhouse. So just for reference, this greenhouse can be really humid because we water all of our seedlings in here, and it can be really hot even on just a 20-25 degree day outside. Once the sun shines on the glass, it can get up over 60 degrees in here. So this dahlia has not really had the best time. After I found it, I threw it outside onto our veggie beds where it's been sitting with a few of its friends in full frost, full sun, full everything, and you can see it's actually still sprouting. So see this little green shoot in here? That's a brand new sprout that's just coming up, and it's got some on the other side as well. So dahlias can be really tough. They get a bad rap for being divas, but they'll put up with a lot. The one main thing that will cause problems is if they're too wet. So if in doubt, underwater rather than overwater, and you'll be fine. But they'll let you know as well when they want water. They get drip. That's not what we're talking about today. We are talking about storage mainly. I know this is something that most people who buy dahlias don't usually think about until after they've had their dahlias for a year and then dug them up. And that's if they think about them at all. In most places in Australia, you'll get away with leaving the dahlias in the ground. Just for future reference, if that's something that is of interest to you, so long as you have free draining soil, they'll usually be totally fine in Australia. We don't freeze in most places. If you do, if you are sort of up where you get a lot of snow, probably dig them. But if you don't, then yeah, most of the time we can just leave them in the ground. So storage though isn't always something that you're going to have thought about once you get your dahlias and then all of a sudden you have them. And if they've been sent to you early, like I've already received some from Tesla, then you have a problem if you're in Victoria or Tasmania or somewhere else and you can't plant them until November. That's several months of storage. So the first thing, if you are going to store your dahlia, is to find a location for where you're going to put them. You want, if you're planning to store them all the way through until you put them in the ground, then you're going to want somewhere that is relatively cool so that they don't wake up too early, and you're also going to want somewhere that is very dark. The light will wake them up. It will also affect them. They don't like it. They're a tuber. Think about potatoes. You don't leave them on your kitchen bench because bad things happen. Dahlias are the same. Don't leave them in the sun. Put them somewhere really dark. So good options can be a garage. If you've got it, just put them up on a shelf so they're not sitting on the concrete. That can get a bit damp. I've kept mine in the laundry before. It's not always the best option because it can be a bit humid, but depending what you're storing them in, that can be okay. Or anywhere else dark. They can go in your shed. If you've got a shed, if you've got a little potting shed or a garden shed, that can be a good option. Try to keep it so that the mice can't get in there, because I know I've found bush rats curled up in mine a few times, which is not the most fun that you can have on a Sunday morning. But yes, and also, as I said, I kept mine in here in the glass house, and that was fine through winter as well. So there are a lot of different places. The main thing you're going to want is that it's not too humid or damp. And if that's all you have, if all you have is your laundry, just keep an eye on them. And you can also add a few desiccant packets to your storage as well, or you could choose something that might absorb a bit more of that moisture, like sawdust or wood shavings seem to do. Which brings us to the next point of, what do you put in with your tubers as a sort of a medium to, or the reason that we do this is to really mitigate the effects of what's going on outside. So it gives it that buffer between the air, regulates the temperature, all that sort of good thing. The main thing with the question of how you store dahlias and what sort of a medium you use is that the more people you ask, the more answers you're going to get. There are so many different options out there, it is not funny, and that I think just goes to show how tough dahlias can be and how variable your climate can be. So you can try a few different things, find the one that works for you, find the one that's available, that's always a really good thing, and go with that. So there's sawdust, vermiculite, potting mix, wood shavings, there's paper, you can wrap in newspaper, you can use just shaved or stripped paper is an option, and some people wrap in Glad wrap. I don't really endorse that one. I'm sure it works, but just for the extra plastic waste, not for me. Some people just hang them in plastic bags in their garage. So, you know, there's so many different options there. Personally, I have used paper. Back when we only had about 60 dahlias, I wrapped them all in newspaper. Now that we have over 600 dahlias, that's not such an option. It was like pass the parcel, but it's just a few too many. So last year, instead of paper, I did potting mix, and that worked really well. Just be aware that sometimes when you open a new bag of potting mix, it can be quite wet. So you can either open it and leave it to dry a little bit, or if you do put it straight on your dahlias, just monitor them. They might get a little bit moldy, but you really just want to make sure that they dry out. So because I use crates with the open sides, they dried out really easily. But if you're putting it into sort of a big Rubbermaid or a plastic container, that might not work so well. Just something to think about. This year we are using wood shavings because, again, it was what we could get. It was free from a factory. It seems to be working really well, but then in saying that, my dahlias this year are stored in a shed and it can be a little bit damp in the shed, so that's probably helping with the wood shavings. If you were using them inside and your house was not damp, you can spritz with a little bit of water sometimes. The way that the dahlias will tell you if they are too dry is they'll start to get that little bit desiccated or that little bit wrinkled, which is what we talked about last time. And I do have another example to show you. So just like this, if you start to see them getting a bit wrinkled, that means that they need just a little spritz of water. If you start seeing them get moldy, you can take them out, give them a dunk in something that will wash the mold off. I use a bleach solution, and then you can dust with sulfur. That's totally fine as well, but then you'll want to check what you can do to fix the problem, because otherwise the mold's not going to go away. So either move them somewhere else, keep the lid more open, get a bit of airflow, all those sorts of things. The third thing you'll want to think about is what you put the dahlia and the medium in. So you can use a cardboard box or a shoebox if you've only got a few of them. You can use a crate, you can use, as I said, a big tub, big plastic tub. But the main, oh, and some people use polystyrene veggie boxes that they can get from the greengrocer. They'll often give those away to you if you go and ask nicely. So all of those things can work. The main thing I would say is if you're going to use a plastic tub with a lid on it, just leave the lid ajar, because then that'll help get that airflow in there so that the dahlias can breathe. You won't get the condensation, they won't mold up, all that sort of stuff. The last note on that is, if all you can do when the dahlias arrive is open them up, look at them, and then leave them in the box, they're probably going to be fine. Most dahlias are going to come packed in one of these mediums. There might not be a lot of it, but there should be enough to cover the dahlia because it should be cushioning them. So if all you can do is open up your package, if they've come in plastic bags, make sure you open them again so that they can breathe, but you should be opening them anyway to check on them. That's it, like pack them back up, put them away. The other thing that I'll just say really quickly that I've forgotten to say before now is when you open your dahlias, label them. I'm not good at keeping labels near anything, so I know as soon as I open them I get a marker. I use a garden marker or a oil-based paint marker. Sharpie definitely have one. You can definitely get them at Bunnings. I think you can also just get them at supermarkets. And I write on the tuber, whatever it is, just so I know this is it. If I lose it later, it doesn't matter, because I've sat on the ground too many times holding two different tubers and thinking, are you dragon blood or are you dragon blood? Which one went with that label? And it's not fun. You have to wait until they flower then and hope. So label them as soon as you get them out. It just saves a lot of hassle later. So that's storage. It's really simple. Most things will store pretty well. A portion of them won't. Some cultivars just plain old store better than others. There's not much you can do about it. Yeah, so that's fine. They'll store now until you're ready to plant them out. If you're doing your check, because you should check on them every few weeks just to make sure everything is going okay and that you don't need to change anything. But if you do that check and you can see that it's starting to sprout, at that point you can either pot it up, and we'll talk about that in a second, or you can just snip the cutting off or snip the growth off, and then it will just sprout more later. But that'll stop it from getting leggy, so that's fine, and it'll stop it putting too much energy into that first growth that you don't actually want. But if you keep it somewhere relatively cool, they won't wake up. They'll react to the heat, so that'll be fine. The next option that you have is to put them straight in a pot. If you want to do this just as a temporary method because you don't really trust yourself storing them inside, you can use a relatively small pot. So something like this can be quite good. It's not overly large. Pop in some potting mix. If you're going to plant it out later, it doesn't really matter what sort of potting mix it is, just make sure it drains really well. Pop your tuber in, lay it sideways if you can, if not, straight up and down will be okay as well. Again, not its final resting place, you just want it in here to look after it until November. When you plant it, don't water it, you don't have to. You could give it a little bit of a spritz if you were trying to wake it up, but it's not necessary. The main thing, if you are going to put it in a pot, make sure it goes somewhere that is quite protected from frost. You don't want that pot getting really cold or getting the frost damage if something does happen to pop out of it. So again, garage can be a good idea, or just under your veranda will also work. Or into the greenhouse. You can stick it in a greenhouse if you have one. But if you're watering frequently in the greenhouse, and it's not this sort of a setup, if it's one of the up and down ones, maybe consider putting it up the top where it isn't going to get wet. Because again, when they're dormant, you really don't want them sitting in too much water. So that's planting. Then when it's ready, you can take the whole thing and plant it out. Once it does start to sprout, that's when you can start to water, even if it's a bit early. So if it sprouts in September, just water it through until November and it will be fine. The other option that I know a lot of people are keen to try is potting up for cuttings. We're going to do that now. It's now August, so it's pretty early. We're also going to try planting it in October, which is why we're trying to move everything on a little bit quicker this year. Potting up for cuttings is pretty easy. What you'll want is a relatively warm location so that you can wake them up a bit easier. So for me, that's the glass house. I don't use any heat mats because I don't have them, but I find again it gets really warm in here just with a bit of sunshine, so that's not a problem. So if you pot up for cuttings, you can have, there's sort of two different options for sizes, but you can really use anything that the tuber fits in. So one option is to use a fairly small pot. So I've got this one here to show you. So this one I've potted up as if I was going to take cuttings from it. You can see it's only a very small pot compared to the last one I showed you. If your tuber doesn't fit in a pot and this is all you have, remember you can always cut the bottom. Just leave it a little bit of time to cure before planting it. So you can see here what I've done is I've planted it up to the neck, and so that just the crown is sitting out. So this one has its eyes just here. So what that means is it gives me options. If I wanted to just let it grow up and then take leafy cuttings, I could do that. I can also take cuttings right at the base, or I can take a tuber cutting where I take a little bit of tuber away with it as well. That's what you want to do. It's pretty straightforward. Again, potting mix, doesn't matter which one you use. They're not going to be in here forever, and that tuber is a source of food. So if you buy really premium potting mix, it's probably just money down the drain because they really don't need it. And you can always give them a little bit of a foliar feed to really keep them going. But this now I would sprinkle with a little bit of water every now and then just to try and encourage it to wake up and be warm. And you can see as well, I've put in a little popsicle stick with this one's name. So this one is Peachy, which is a really fun variety. Highly recommend. The other option is if you have zero space but a lot that you want to take cuttings from, you can use a seed tray like this. And I'll just pop some in here right now and I'll show you how you would do that. Okay, so I've filled up the tray. I've put a layer of potting soil, my hands are filthy, look at that. A layer of potting soil in the bottom of the tray. Then when I put in my tubers, I sort of angle them so that the tail end points down, the neck points up. Remember, the neck and the crown is where the eyes are going to form, so that's where you're going to want to take your cuttings from, because that's the only place that you're going to get leafy growing. And then I've covered over the top with more potting soil so that they're nice and tucked in there, and it gives me easy access if I want to take cuttings, which is the ultimate aim. So just remember, while you're waiting for your dahlias to sprout, do not overwater and do not panic if it takes a little while for them to wake up. And then once they do have growth, a decent amount of growth, then you can start giving them a little bit of water because they'll have their roots out and they'll be ready to deal with it. So free draining potting soil if you can. And again, oh, I'll just talk briefly as well. I've just had the thought because I've got this other pot here that I brought in. There's been some questions about what size pot you should use if you're planning to grow your dahlias in pots. This is the size that we've used quite successfully. The label on the size tells me it's 290 mil, so roughly 30 centimeters there. This is what we used when we grew everything in a pot just a few years ago, and it was pretty good. The main thing I will say is, if you're going to put them in pots, try and put them somewhere where they might get afternoon shade. The reason is otherwise the pots are going to get really, really hot, and you also need to make sure that you're keeping the water up to them. But generally speaking, dahlias do fine in pots. Sometimes if they do it, most of the time the tubers will sort of be contained by the pot, but sometimes if the pot is a little bit weak or it is a particularly vigorous grower, the tubers can also explode the pot. So just be aware of that, but no, it'll be fine. So I hope that has answered some of the questions about what you do with these dahlias once you have them. The main things to remember are open them up, make sure they can breathe, make sure they're somewhere dark and cool if you're storing them, and otherwise you can just pot them up and put them outside and then sort of forget about them until it's time to go as well. That will also work pretty well. Yeah, I'll put them up for cuttings. Have a go at taking cuttings. Why we do cuttings, it's pretty easy for dahlias. They take really well. And it also is a really good way to increase your own stock. So instead of one plant, you can have 2, 3, some people take up to 30 cuttings in a year off one plant. Those are the leafy cuttings. They're a bit different to the tuber cuttings, but that's still an option. And it's also sort of a nice insurance policy to know that you've turned your one tuber into 2. So if one gets eaten by slugs once you plant it out, at least you haven't lost your favourite tuber. So yeah, if this has been helpful, like, subscribe, follow us on Instagram or Facebook. We're at QC Flower Farm, and drop me a line if you have any other questions. I'm happy to help out, and I'll hopefully see you next time.